Welcome to the Purple and Bold podcast, a bonus or emergency episode, or I don't know how you want to put it, but we're getting together quickly here because Katie's got a new desk in her apartment to do this from, and we wanted to show it off. No, actually,
Yeah, that's the whole reason.
if you're clicking on this, you probably have already seen reports of Bob Chesney, JMU's football coach, heading to UCLA. The reports also indicate that he would stick it out, obviously, coach Friday for the Sun Belt Championship game, and if JMU gets it to the college football playoff, which we'll have a whole nother episode this week where we can talk about the odds of them getting to the playoff, but we'll stick to coaching news today. But yeah, according to Pete Thamel from ESPN and some other reports, he would stick around if JMU makes it to the college football playoff, but it does sound like he's going to be the next coach at UCLA, which I guess just to break it down for everybody, he talked for 30 minutes on the Sun Belt call, which we were standing outside the room listening to that on our phones before we walked in and had our own press conference with Bob Chesney, and then which lasted almost another half hour. So he spent about an hour talking with media inside the APC today on the JMU campus. And then almost as soon as he walked out of the room was Thamel's tweet about UCLA. Him basically, it didn't 100% say like he'd accepted a job, but like, that was his typical tweet when that's about to happen. There's been other reports since then kind of confirming him to UCLA. Interesting timing. I've seen people criticize Chesney for the timing of it. I would be shocked if he's the source of the leak on this and it's not coming from UCLA. But that's where it stands right now as we sit down to try to record our little emergency podcast. Katie, your initial reaction as we sat in that room and then everybody kind of started like pointing to each other's phones and tapping each other on the shoulder and everything else right after Bob left the room.
Yeah, I think the door had just clicked shut and I heard Preston Comer at the Breeze say Katie, turned his phone toward me and I saw the tweet. And from there, it's like your brain starts going a million miles per minute where it's like, okay, he was just talking to us that hey, let's make this year the focus and next year will have its time when it does. And then you also remember who you're sitting in the room with. It's not just us as media members sitting in there. There were players at that point that were sitting waiting for their chance to go and talk with us. So it's almost like how do you react? How do I still make sure that I'm doing my job and asking questions to these players about this game on Friday, but also I need to be, typing up information on my phone. So it was definitely crazy. And then to go off all of this too, the second I'm about to run out the door to go home and make sure everything's up, I get asked hey, do you want to do this one-on-one right now with this player? And it's just like a jumble moment of what is going on in my life right now. So I did do that one-on-one interview as well, but a little bit hectic, a little bit crazy, a lot of it, actually, not even a little bit. Yeah, and I think it's just weird, and I know we'll talk more about this. Chesney was asked today about the coaching positions that were opening up. Obviously so. His name has been circulated around for weeks now, and I mean, even if you go back to the beginning of the season, I think there are plenty of conversations that are being had of, hey, if this season plays out the way we expect it to, is Bob Chesney even going to be the head coach next year? So it was weird to hear kind of the answers that he was giving us, and then to it literally happen immediately after the room that these reports start coming out. Like you said, I think it's pretty clear that it doesn't seem like it's on JMU's end. Just like I think it's safe to say, 2 years ago when Cignetti left for Indiana, those reports weren't coming out of JMU's side either. They were coming out of Indiana's. Even when I got it confirmed, it was from a different point of view, not even connected to JMU. So it's a wild, wild week. And, I think it's for the last several weeks, all that has been preached is, hey, we need to focus on ourselves. We need to focus on this team. And I think that's going to be put to the test as you look ahead of what's going to be played, 4 days from now in Bridgeworth Stadium.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, there's pretty much no way that it came from JMU or Chesney's camp, the timing of the leak, but it was definitely very interesting timing, just because like if it had been 5 minutes earlier, we would have been able to like actually ask Bob face to face about this, gotten his answer. And it's you know, notable too that like sitting there the entire time, like he didn't shy away from questions about it. It felt like he was being pretty straightforward with everybody about the fact that, you know, he was getting interest for other jobs, that he was probably like looking at other jobs, and maybe hadn't decided what he was doing yet. So that aspect of it, I think, was just really notable, in the fact that like it didn't feel like, oh, we just got one pulled over on us, to me anyway. Being in the room, it felt like he was, you know, answering it pretty straightforward. Not necessarily his obligation to keep us in the loop, but it does seem like, you know, he's controlling the locker room aspect of this too, like as far as like players having, treating them with some respect about what they're gonna have to face here coming in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, and it is important to say when you talk about the player aspect of it, we media availability today was Jacob Thomas, Trent Hendrick, and Pat McMurtry. I don't know how much of that was necessarily planned, in a sense of like these are older guys who understand kind of what college athletics has become and the business that it has somewhat become over the last few years. I will say too, like, I mean, I got a call Saturday night from Chris Brooks asking who I wanted to talk to during Monday's press conference. And I had mentioned Trent and JT just because of their history with the program. So obviously some of this is probably being planned before, you know, the coaching decisions are being made. But, you know, you're talking to players who are going to handle this professionally. They're not really going to slip up and say what's been talked about or what hasn't been talked about. And I think that's kind of maybe what Chesney would want in that at this time. And even just talking, seeing how he answered questions today, I don't think he necessarily wanted to give all too much away, but I don't know even then how much players did know, didn't know when the information was going to come out. I mean, sitting there today, too, you kind of almost have to feel bad for these guys that are sitting in this room and they know we're all looking down at our phones for a certain reason and they can piece together what's going on. So it's definitely a complicated morning into afternoon for all of us.
Yeah, but I don't feel like, even, you know, going back a couple of years ago to Kurt Cignetti, I think everybody knew it was definitely a possibility he was leaving. I didn't get the sense that like he was necessarily just, it was anything he would discuss with his team in the locker room, like that he would just, you know, shut down any of that. We're not going to even go there. I feel like in the past couple of years, some things have kind of shifted towards coaches just feeling like they kind of got to like put it out there that, you know, hey, I'm probably going to interview for other jobs, and, you know, you guys are probably going to look at the transfer portal, and we'll see where everybody is at the end of the year, but let's finish this year. And that's the way it was at Marshall last year. We saw them go out and blow out Louisiana in the Sun Belt Championship game, which I'm sure everybody associated with JMU is hoping for a similar situation here. But I mean, Charles Huff just kind of laid it out to his team. It was a little bit different because he was almost getting forced out of Marshall, but he laid out to his team, hey, like, I'm probably not coming back here. I'm looking at other jobs. This is where we are. Let's finish this thing. I feel like that's almost the way you've got to handle it as a coach anymore, because just everybody's on the move.
Yeah, and I know someone had responded to my tweet when, you know, I initially put it out that he was leaving, and it was a screenshot of, I can't even remember now what reporter had said that, you know, he met with his team this morning and informed them of the decision. And they're like, well, do we actually think he talked to his team? And I would say, I think it's a pretty safe bet that he did. They did practice today. Usually Monday is a day off, but with the game being on Friday, everything's pushed up a little bit. So they were practicing this morning before we even got there to do media availability. So I would say, and just listening to the way Chesney has talked about his team and how much he values kind of making sure that he's coaching these guys, not even just on the field, but off the field too. I do think it's safe to say that a conversation was had with the team that this decision was coming most likely and when it was coming and how it would look over the next couple of weeks for the team.
Yeah, and assuming that this news is accurate, which we don't really have any reason to doubt it at this point, it means JMU is going to be looking for another coach, which is something people are getting used to around here. But last time around, it was, Jeff Bourne's kind of farewell tour where he got to make all these hires. Football, basketball, also played, I think, a big hand in choosing Matt Roan as his successor as AD. Now it's going to be Matt Roan's job to make this transition, hire a new coach, or at least make the decision along with a search firm if JMU decides to go that route, which they traditionally have. But as we know, it's a new president, it's a new AD. I think that's the most intriguing or scary, or however you want to look at it, aspect of this time around, is that it's been such a culture thing with JMU. It's just, the next coach comes in, steps into a really good situation, a place where they can win. They want to come to JMU because it's a place where they can win. But Matt Roan, I think, has been extremely successful AD at all his stops so far, including JMU, doing great things with fundraising, really, I think, raising the level of energy around JMU's athletic programs and being out there as the face of this athletic department. But he has never had to make a football or basketball hire as an AD. This is going to be a completely new thing for him, which is twofold. We're going to see how he does with it. We're also going to see what his style with it is, because we knew what Jeff Bourne was looking for. And that made it pretty easy to pinpoint Bob Chesney as a top target for JMU really early on in the process last time around. We don't really know what Matt Roan or President Jim Schmidt's style in this kind of situation is.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Jeff Bourne liked coaches that had been head coaches in the past and had been successful in the past, and maybe turned programs that weren't historically known for winning into winning programs. And you saw that with Chesney, you saw that with Cignetti, you saw it with Mike Houston too. So you knew, like you said, you knew what you were getting out of it. And I think with this one, they do, even though it's going to be his first football hire, I still think Roan and the athletic department are at such a benefit that coaches are going to be lining up for this opening. This isn't like a job that they have to go out and try and have a sales pitch to someone. This is going to attract top level candidates who are good coaches and who can win right out of the gate. I do think maybe the harder part comes with, what does the transfer portal look like for JMU over the next few weeks? Who on this current roster decides to enter? Who comes back? Who enters the portal and then comes back out of it? I think that's the biggest thing that maybe should be even a little bit more daunting than the coaching search itself, because I think a good coach is going to be hired regardless of the fact, just because of the nature that this JMU football program has become over the last 20 some years.
Yeah. And I would tend to believe that Roan's probably, he hasn't come in here trying to reinvent the wheel in too many ways, other than things that have completely changed about college sports. When it comes maybe to like how they're going to handle revenue sharing and things like that. He's had to go his own way because there wasn't a model. So I wouldn't be shocked if he looks for the same kind of candidate that Jeff Bourne does, but we never know. He may be more open to assistant coaches or, guys that he's had a tie to in the past. I don't know that there's a ton of those kind of candidates out there that would really make a lot of sense at JMU. But yeah, if you do look at people who have been successful at a quote unquote lower level, I think, like you said, there's going to be lots of people lining up for this job. I mean, there were guys who really knew they weren't getting it last time around, but wanted to do that interview because they wanted to kind of be in the mind of the people at JMU. If this happened again, and they were probably thinking maybe 3-4 years down the road, maybe not necessarily 2, but yeah, I know for a fact that there are some other FCS coaches that were interviewing more for the hope of they could be in the mix next time around and thinking they were going to get the job in 2023.
Yeah, this is just, it is that kind of job. I think after yesterday in the coaching carousel, everybody was kind of saying, Tulane, Memphis, North Texas, like these are the schools, USF too. These are the schools that are, maybe not so much North Texas now that I'm saying this all out loud, but these are the schools that are like the premier group of 5 teams that coaches are going to want to coach at. And I do think JMU falls into that category now that the head coaching position is opening up, that it's going to be in that discussion of, well, I really want to go coach at that school because I know I can win quickly and I know my talents can do well there. And if the reports that have come out that JMU was prepared to make Bob Chesney the highest paid coach in the Sun Belt, if those are true, JMU does have some money to play with. I don't know how much it matches up to a Tulane and a Memphis, but it's obviously more than what they brought Chesney to Harrisonburg on. And so that said, I don't know how much of the money would be given up to a new coach versus Chesney, who's proved it at the school for 2 years. But I think JMU fans shouldn't really stress too much about this hire, just because like you said, there were coaches that were interviewing for it, and it is a desirable job.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk a little bit about, potential candidates, keeping in mind that we have not had an opportunity to do any actual real reporting, dig into who might be looking at this job, but there's names that make sense given what we know about it. I mean, you can look at Joe Harrisimiak, a guy who we were pretty sure was in the mix last time around. But then he goes and has like an 0-12 season at UMass this year, which is a really tough job. I think he would do a lot better at JMU, but maybe he just coached his way out of the running if he wanted to get back into the mix at this one. But, him, Delane Fitzgerald at Southern Utah is a JMU alum who I know at least got talked to by the search committee last time around. Continues to have modest success at Southern Utah, which is not an easy place to win either. So there's a couple guys who were kind of in it last time whose names may pop up again. Bryant Haynes, former DC, who's now at Indiana. So you could pick a list of probably former JMU assistants who might be talked about here. Any names that come to mind to you, just kind of initially beyond those three, or if any of those three really jump out at you?
Well, I have always been a really big defender of Joe Harrisimiak and that he's a great coach. Obviously, that UMass job, like you said, not an easy job to take and win at. So if someone looks at him and they look at that like resume, they're probably going to be like, "Oh gosh, please no, I don't know, please just no." I don't think that 0-12 record is necessarily a good indicator of how successful he can be as a coach. So I wouldn't say that he's necessarily the one that I'm like signaling in on as much, but I do think he is a good coach. Since he was probably in the discussion last time. You mentioned Bryant Haynes. I have long been someone, as everybody probably knows if they follow me on social media, I love watching good defense. He coaches amazing defenses. And I think he should have maybe been in a discussion more about possibly becoming a head coach, not necessarily at JMU, but I was kind of shocked that his name hadn't been floated around over recent weeks at some of these programs as much as maybe I thought he would be, because I do think he's a young coach. He's really, really growing into the game well. So I think he could be a great head coach. I would say one that's the most intriguing to me right now, who is possibly in consideration over at Memphis too, is Jerry Mack, who left Tennessee, was a running backs coach at Tennessee, went to Kennesaw State and just turned that program around and helped it really develop into this FBS team in just 1 year. I was really, really impressed of what he had done at Kennesaw State this year. So he's someone who I think his stay is going to be pretty brief there, and he's one that JMU should probably look at pretty closely.
Yeah, totally agree on Jerry Mack. And you throw in like NFL experience for him too, which could be a selling point at this point in college football. Yeah, if you can win like that at Kennesaw State, I think that says great things about you. We'll quickly mention, we talked about Haynes. We could do like a whole JMU defensive coordinator list. We could throw Corey Heatherman in there.
Throw Heatherman in there.
And Colin Hitchler. Like the fact that he's done so great. We don't know how Roan feels about like keeping it in house. Like, cause like I said, he's never done anything like this before. So, that may be more of a possibility this time around to like keep an assistant, especially somebody who's done that great and has been at some big time programs.
Yeah, and this is to say some of these names that we're throwing out, like a Corey Heatherman or a Bryant Haynes, it would obviously be a pay cut to move down from their roles. Heatherman at Miami as a defensive coordinator and Haynes at Indiana as the defensive coordinator. But a lot of that plays into where do they see their careers progressing to? Do they want to stay a coordinator? Do they want to make that jump into becoming a head coach? And that's where you could maybe see them willing to take a step back in terms of money if it means it's getting them a head coaching job. And then I think with someone like Colin Hitchler, the question that starts to play in my mind is, how much does he want to be a head coach, or is he someone that sees his career playing out as a coordinator and is, because, just talking with him, I think he really, really loves his role as a coordinator, and not everybody wants to become a head coach. So I think is maybe one of the bigger questions of, does he even want to become a head coach, or is that coordinator role really what is kind of his bread and butter?
And that brings up something that I talk about. I think for JMU, anybody in the Sun Belt, you've got to be looking for those guys who really, really want to be head coach. And like, they'll come to JMU for 800,000 a year over being a defensive coordinator for $1 million a year at a Power 4 school, because that's where they want their career to go. And they know they can win at JMU, and they know they'll get a bigger, better job down the line. You don't want somebody who's going to like say, let's see how this goes, and then if it doesn't work out, hey, I can always go back to being, an assistant at Alabama and make money. Like, I think the desire to run a program has to be a really important part of like what you're looking for in these interviews when you're Matt Rohn, and more than likely a search firm helping him out. But that's just kind of like a sidetrack. I think you can also kind of like make another list of guys. Jerry Mack fits this bill, but if you go that route again, where you're looking for the successful coaches at other levels, and I think we can say Conference USA is probably like, most of those schools would be it would be a step up to go JMU from Conference USA for most of those schools. You look to the FBS level again, or the FCS level again, like JMU has done fairly often. Mike Jacobs at Mercer, I think, is a name that's going to pop up for a lot of these G5 jobs coming up. Kevin Cahill at Lehigh. I like Chris Reichert at Gardner-Webb. His record's not great, but I think that's a place where it's not super easy to win a ton of games. And I think, keep in mind, the people who have worked at the firm that helped JMU make the Chesney hire have kind of looked at Gardner-Webb as like a stepping stone to JMU. That they've encouraged people to take the Gardner-Webb job because it might get you a job at a program like JMU. So I think that's something to keep in mind, maybe if they go with the same firm, with Drew Turner's firm there. But those are just some names. Another one I see tossed out a lot. He's not a head coach currently, but Navy's offensive coordinator, Drew Cronick, he left Mercer to be an assistant, which to me is kind of a red flag. But his record, his resume does reflect Chesney's a little bit other than that move. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's a name we hear a little bit here early on in the stages too. I don't know. What do you think, Katie? Who else should we keep an eye on?
I think that's a pretty good list right now. Obviously there's maybe always going to be a sleeper candidate that people aren't expecting. I think, we did, you did jokingly, maybe not jokingly, text one name of a Charles Huff, which then I referred to him as the coach of the Sun Belt over the weekend. So if he really wanted to get out of Mississippi, that's a great coach. Look what he did with Southern Miss this year. But I don't know. I do think JMU just has some great coaches that are probably going to be lining up. They probably started lining up an hour or so ago, that are going to be, making their best sales pitch to try and take over this job. I know I said earlier, JMU doesn't need to make the sales pitch itself. Like, coaches are going to line up, but these coaches themselves are going to make the sales pitch for themselves. So I think it's going to be maybe some sleepless nights here over the next few weeks, maybe just a week, maybe a nice quick coaching search like last time when they found Chesney, but we'll see.
Yeah. I will just say this about Huff. He is a DMV guy, played at Hampton. If Matt Rohn wanted to make that kind of a splash where you go like hire a championship coach from within your conference, we'll see if that's his style. But
you just want it for the chaos, right?
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like, if he hadn't just taken that Southern Miss job, it might have been a great fit. We'll see what happens.
Telling you, the coach of the Sun Belt.
Yeah. Anything else before we wrap this up? Any other just tidbits about the search coming up, or what we've seen from Chesney. Has your phone blown up any since we started recording this with any new information, or should we just go ahead and wrap up and
nothing is
part of
blown
our
up.
job, which is like
Yeah,
recording?
nothing has blown up other than my Twitter notification so far. Had a lot of people texting me being like, "Wait, is this true?" And that's always fun to do that one. But make sure people keep following along this week because we still have a championship game to cover this weekend.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that later in the week. Another press conference for Bob Chesney later this week too. We get a bonus one because of a Thursday pre-championship press conference. So that one I'm sure will be a lot of fun to go.
Yeah, it will be great. I'll be there.
So, all right. Well, that's it. That's our episode of Purple and Bold from DNR Media. Be sure to check out our other show, Postscript, where we talk about just the journalistic process and stuff. But in the meantime, that'll do it for us. Thanks.